So thanks very much. I'm really very honored and excited to be able to share some of the work I've been doing with everybody in the audience today. The title of my talk is Material Inquiry. Matt just alluded to the idea that this is a main concern of my research. I want to describe what that is for you, and as a word of warning so that everybody knows what's coming in a second, we're going to do a little material inquiry activity ourselves. So if you're in the middle of doing something or taking notes, or I see some laptops open, and that's fantastic because that's the way I take notes as well whenever I'm doing my research in a classroom. I always make sure that the teacher and the students know that I'm sitting in the back with my iPhone taking notes and not texting. I'm paying very close attention, but that's the way I take notes when I'm doing my research. So if you find yourself in that position right now, I completely understand where you are, but in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to put everything down and to engage with a little bit of material inquiry with us. The thing that really interests me about what's going on in maker education is that it seems around the country in different places, different conferences, and people that I work with, teachers and in-service teachers and pre-service teachers, and with students, that there might indeed be a moment happening in our culture, broadly speaking, very diffusely speaking, where school is beginning to change in some really interesting and exciting ways. And I think one of the reasons that we're all here is because we feel it too, and we're trying to understand. Some of us are in really amazing and lucky situations, like here at Iolani, where this amazing video that we just saw. I want to point back to the idea, however, that no matter what kind of environment you're in, if you feel something of this spark of interest around the notion that innovation and learning how to be innovative is somehow changing, that there's some new opportunity going on, that we as you just heard, not to get misled by the fancy tools that sometimes you see in really amazing videos. And this is not to detract in any way whatsoever. If you are in that situation and you have the really amazing possibility of using these new tools, these new internet-connected tools, use them, for crying out loud. They're amazing. But if you don't have them, don't get upset about that either. Now, I'm imagining that a lot of us in the room as maker educators, in one way or another, leading maker spaces or leading innovation labs, part of our jobs is to work with the people in our building. Part of our jobs is to work with the people who may be looking across the campus or on the other side of the building and saying, wow, they're getting fancy stuff, or what is a maker space anyway, and why should we care about a maker space? My position on that is that that is indeed part of our job pardon me, as maker educators. We're working with our students, but we're also really working with our fellow faculty, with our colleagues. So this is why I asked Mike to get me some water. So here we go. That's material right here. We're not going to be working with water in a second, so don't worry about getting anything wet. My interest is in how the materials of our maker spaces, the materials of our curriculum, are nudging schooling into a new relationship with innovation. I'm really very much excited about these possibilities of innovation. So just as a shout out towards the very brief history of maker education, probably a lot of you in the room are familiar with around 10 years or so ago, the emergence of Make Magazine, the Maker Fair, the various ways that we started getting involved. And it's really wonderful in many, many different ways. It's something that is quite diffuse, as I said a second ago. There's many different ways to talk about maker education. I would say that probably one of the key underlying ideas is that we make to learn, that we get our kids into our classrooms or into our maker spaces, and in the process of making something, we're learning something about purpose, about mastery and relationships and empathy. All of these things kind of diffuse through the broad idea of what I would call maker education. Now, we could talk about this for hours and hours. There's many, many different threads. There's many different ways to talk about it. My particular interest is in materials. How do materials matter to innovation? How do materials matter in the learning of innovation? Now, I'm talking about this from a particular point of view, and it may seem almost run-of-the-mill in some cases. This is what I find when I go into makerspaces around the country and say, what kind of materials are you using? And in a lot of cases, there's some very good resources around and very good also videos and people talking about the way to organize materials in your makerspace, color code things by boxes, by electronics, by consumables, by things that can't be consumed. There's all kinds of different ways, but what I'm not hearing talking about is how materials fundamentally engage in a conversational way of knowing. It's a little esoteric, so in a minute we're going to actually play with it in a second, play with it with our hands. But I want to just lay out a little bit of where I'm coming from on this. When I listen to scientists and inventors and artists and movie makers, poets talk about where their greatest innovations have come from, like they're being interviewed after they won the MacArthur Genius Grant, or they're being interviewed on a TV or a radio show or a talk show about, tell us about where the movie came from, or tell us about why you wrote that book. What I hear over and over and over again is a sense of surprise. I don't even know where it came from. Or I heard the melody in the air. Or I was walking down the street and suddenly it occurred to me that that's what I had to write about. Or in the lab, the way we were mixing up the test tubes, one of our lab assistants made a mistake and suddenly we were mixing A and B instead of A and C and we had this brand new innovation. I hear it constantly. David Esterly wrote this amazing book about wood carving. And if you haven't read it, I think probably it would be very interesting to map some of the intersections between the book on engineering, on Olin Engineering, and what Esterly is talking about. But one of the things that he says again and again in the book is that learning to carve, he's a masterful wood carver, one of the best in the world. Learning to carve came from the wood itself, that the wood taught him how to carve. And he says this again and again with multiple examples throughout his book. And when he boils it down into a very short phrase at one point in the book, and he says, often in education, we think that ideas come first, and then we use the tools to manifest the ideas. That's not the way it happens. It does not happen that way. The skills come first. Learning how to carve comes first, with no idea. Learning how to engage with the wood, and as you work and work and work and iterate, that's the word we would use today, or rapid prototype is the word that we would hear more often today than anything else. But in the process of getting involved with the wood, the ideas emerge almost from the wood itself. Yesterday I had a chance to work with a high school poetry class here at Iolani. And here we go again. I'm going to have to get another drink of water. And the teacher and I had done a little bit of email communication about the lesson that I wanted to do. I'm really interested in physical poetry and how it's interesting. It can be a lot of fun to get physical poetry incarnated in electronics. And so notebook hacking is a thing. If you Google the word notebook hacking, you'll run into it. But using very simple craft electronics, so like copper tape, and a lot of you in this room will have already seen copper tape. But I love to introduce copper tape as the stuff that keeps the snails out of the flowers because you can buy it at any kind of gardening store. So very simple materials, and I worked with the high school students to think about poetry as a physical, interactive engagement with their notebooks. So they're putting electronics in the notebooks, in their poetry notebooks. And Susan, the teacher, told me that she was very interested in this thing that I'm talking about because for her, what she thinks about is that when she's talking to teachers, they're always talking to her about how do they have time to cut up all the paper ahead of time? How do they have time to get everything ready for their students so that their students can just build something or assemble something? And she said, what I think is that when teachers do all the cutting up and all the pasting out ahead of time, they're taking away the chance for learning. That we have to have the time in the curriculum for the kids to cut it up themselves. Because in the cutting, in that routine, iterative cutting of the material, you're beginning to form ideas. And I thought that's exactly what Esterly is talking about. Now, just in case anybody is not into the arts, I hope everybody's really into the arts in one way or another, but just in case you're not into the arts, Matt introduced me as an artist, and it's true, I do call myself an artist. And sometimes I actually make art as well, but more often than not, I'm writing and I'm talking like this. The computer scientist Cynthia Solomon, who worked with Marvin Minsky and with Seymour Papert, names probably very recognizable in a room like this, and in the 1960s at MIT, she was invited to do a keynote at a computer science educators meeting that I was at last month or in the fall. And during her keynote, she said this: I always know when a piece of code is getting really good when it starts to take on a life of its own, when I start to lose a little control of it. And I said, that's material learning. That's what the wood carvers are talking about. That's what the poets are talking about. That's what the writers and movie makers and scientists and inventors are talking about. Even in something as esoteric as computer code as a material, the material of the code is having that same effect on Cynthia Solomon, one of the premier computer scientists of the mid-20th century. So as an idea, I throw it out to you, is that materials have a voice, and that as you relate to the materials, as you empty your mind, maybe it's a little bit of a meditative thing, as you engage with the hands-on skill of the material itself, ideas become available to us. They become available to the conversation. Okay, enough talking. Now let's play with a little bit of material, and let's see if we can explore some of that ourselves. So this is where we put down whatever you've got. Put down your pencils or whatever. I want you to give it, and on your chair when you came in, there were a couple of sheets of plain old copier paper. And if those have disappeared by any chance, maybe you could raise your hand. If you don't see some plain old copier paper sitting around, Matt and Mike are here. We can pass some more out. So we're going to play with paper for a second. What I'd like you to do to start off with is take one of those pieces of paper, so just one piece of paper, and I'd like you to attend to the paper. I'd like you to pay attention to the paper and have a very simple question to ask you. What do you notice? You could shout it out, yeah. What do you notice?
Programmable.
It's programmable. And okay, what else? What else do you notice? White.
Came from a tree.
Came from a tree. Do you notice that it came from a tree? So I would, and you may, in fact, I mean, we're adults here. We have this expanding circles of knowledge, right? But I want you to really attend to the material itself. What do you notice about the material? It's white. What else? Smooth. Translucent. How is it translucent? Hold it up to the right. So if you're sitting in the back, you're holding it against the floor. Maybe it's not so translucent. What do you see if you're holding it at? It would be a different sense of light, right? It'd be more reflective. What about blotchy? Awesome. What else? Symmetrical. How is it symmetrical?
Well, it's like a perfect geometrical shape.
Okay, so it's how about the size? How big is it? Now, how do you know? Do you guys have rulers? How do you know how big it is? Is it 8? I didn't see anybody with a measuring. Is it as big as your face? Is it smaller than your chest? Will it cover your knees? How big is it? How big is that piece of paper? Big as a bread box, depending on the size of the bread these days. What about, what kind of texture does it have? It's smooth. Is it smooth like glass? Well, look at it. Feel it. What does it smell like? What does it remind you of when you smell it? School. Do you remember? In fact, some of us in the room remember the mimeograph machine. And what did you do when you were in first grade and you got what did everybody do? Right? Okay, now I want you to, the paper that's in your hands, I would like you to change the paper in some way. I see somebody folding the paper. And as you change the paper, very closely attend to the paper. What do you notice? What changes? What happens to your relationship with the paper? So change the paper in some way. I see people bending it. I see people rolling it up. I see people tearing it, a little bit of tearing, a little bit of asymmetrical folding. I see somebody crumpling it up. What do you notice? Throw it out. What changes in the way you're noticing the paper? You're holding it. Your grasp has changed, right? So your gesture has changed. Cool. Okay, what else? It crackles. All right, there's a crackling. What else? Say it louder. Functional. How do you mean functional? It's doing something. Okay, the paper's doing something. I see somebody doing this as this is fun. So using it as a fan. Okay, so now it's become a functional. And you know what? What's that?
You wet it, it dissolves.
Oh, wetting it, making it wet, and it's dissolving. You know what, Matt? Somehow, or Mike or somebody. Here we go. I don't have any paper up here. Oh. There's paper everywhere. So, here's the thing. This material is, for the most part, invisible in our lives. It's ironically one of the most important materials in our school practices. And yet, for many people I speak with, and maybe you're noticing this yourself, is that we do not consider this to be a viable part of what we do as educators. Most of the time, probably for almost everybody in this room, this is only visible to us when it comes out of the printer with text on it. Even its presence in the environment is not noted. It's buried away inside a machine. Now, some of us, once in a while, the copier it runs out of paper, and we're the ones lucky enough to be standing there that has to go find a ream and open it up, or even luckier when the machine jams and we're the ones that have to pull the paper out. A teacher told me once that the most exciting part of her day was when the copier jammed. And in a way, it's kind of a sad commentary on what's going on in schools, but in another way, it's an amazing opportunity to think about what engages us, which is problem solving. So when you open up that copier, and I'm sure, again, almost every one of us has done this, and when you open up that amazing, gigantic machine, who would ever thought that these machines can now be like 5 feet long, and you have to dig in, and you have all the instructions about which lever to push, and you open it up, and it's really hot, and sometimes it smells, and then all of a sudden you get one where the powder didn't fuse, and now you've got powder all over the floor. There's many different encounters with material, and often we encounter those encounters as just a big pain in the butt, right? But for her, it was a moment of exploration, of discovery, of being able to delve inside the machine and encounter paper in a different way. So here's the thing, what I'm asking you to attend to is the way that even the most invisible material, plain old copier paper, when we start to attend to it in the ways that I'm suggesting we've just done, we begin to encounter a new relationship with our own bodies and the material itself. And so the notion of which I saw over here when you rolled it up and she said, the way I'm holding it has changed. There's a change in the relationship of my body to this material. There's a gestural change. There's a change in the way my hand works. That is important. This is the kind of thing the poets and scientists are talking about. This is what brings innovation into the relationship between us and the world around us, between us and each other. All right, now here's another thing that I noticed that I find really fascinating. Now, you mentioned sound. You heard it crackling. And I'm sure that somebody else in here heard it crackling too. There's a sonic quality to the paper. Let's play with the sonic quality. How many different sounds you might need if you've ripped or dissolved your paper, you might need a new piece of paper, or maybe not. But let's take another piece of paper and investigate it for its sonic qualities. How many sounds can this piece of paper make? I hear lots of fluttering up here. How about, can we make anything staccato? Who can make something really like pounding and staccato with the paper? Like I did. Or, what else? How about this? How about this? Okay. We all talk about hands-on learning, right? We've heard this word over and over and over again. Those of you that have read John Dewey, you think about learning by doing, and there's a lot of implications about hands-on learning inside broad theories of how education works. My question is, for us as maker educators, is that, so what? How does it connect? How does hands-on learning connect to anything that we value? How does hands-on learning connect to innovation? How do you make it present for your students? And again, looking back to this other part, which I feel is very important in our careers, how do we as maker educators make it present to the other people in our building who may be very skeptical? They may outright resist the whole notion. I don't have time for maker education. It's stealing content time away. I don't have time. I have to teach for the AP. I don't have time. The kids have to be able to get into college. I don't have time because we got to get them ready to read, and they're not, if they're playing with materials, they're not reading. So I don't have time for this. I encounter this all the time. This is one of the most common reactions I get when I go into schools. The principal will invite me in, or the maker educator will invite me in and help me learn how to speak to the rest of the people in the building. And this is the thing, hands-on learning doesn't connect with the learning that we already have built our systems around. And so we have to figure out ways to change the language around why that matters. So for me, hands-on learning equals minds-in learning. It's whole body, minds-in engagement. And we have to figure out ways to talk about that for ourselves. Here's one of the things I remember when I was a little kid. So I think maybe I was 5 or 6 years old, and milk cartons in those days were made out of cardboard, right? They weren't the plastic things we have today, right? So if you can remember and if you visualize in your mind, the milk carton comes to a top, at the top, right? You pry it open. Well, after the milk carton was empty, in my mind, I saw the prow of a ship. That was a boat. And so the milk carton became a ship, and I'd take some pencils and jab them in the top, and that was a mast. And then I had this giant square rigger ship that was 300 feet long and 5 stories tall. And then I had 2 and 3 and 4, and lying on the rug, I had an armada sailing across the living room. And I would take a scissors and cut out little holes and put my little army guys in there, and then there'd be big battles in the middle. And I was completely engaged, and I distinctly remember this. These entirely simple materials, these throwaway materials, these reusable materials, by making very simple manipulations, by exploring the imaginative capabilities of milk cartons and pencils, I was creating entire universes for myself on the living room floor. That's minds in. And I know everybody in the room has examples like that from our own childhoods or from our own even adulthoods, where your mind was suddenly fully engaged in the material process in front of you. That's what we need to be able to figure out how to bring into our building so that people begin to understand it's hands-on. Yes, it's hands-on, but because hands bring the mind and the body into a relationship with everything that's around us, including which they have here at Iolani, which I was really excited to learn about yesterday. They have a hospice care program for the high schoolers. So talk about empathy, talk about ways of engaging empathy, learning about what hospice is. I didn't know what hospice was when I was 15, 16 years old. I had no idea. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's make some noise together. Let's create a little orchestra. So I heard a lot of different, and this is where I'm going to leave the microphone because I want to try to, so sorry about the videotaping, but this is more important. So there's a lot of different ways to make sound, right? So let's divide up into a couple of different sections, and then let's try to make a rhythmic sort of rolling sound together using those different. So how about maybe this group right here? How about you guys right here do this kind of thing? So everybody get a piece of paper and practice. Okay, start practicing. And then how about you guys over here? How about you guys maybe roll the paper up and do it like that? And then how about you guys over here? The whole like this group here. You might need a additional paper, man, or Mike. These guys might need some more paper. I'm thinking, how about we do rips? So let's try it. Everybody at once. Everybody ready? Ready? 1, 2, 3, rip. Nice, right? Now we've got 3 different sounds. We could probably have a lot more sounds. Now we need an orchestra leader. It's 8:30 in the morning. Somebody's dying to volunteer, I'm sure. Yes, right here. Who are you pointing to? All right, so here we got, right? We got this group over here is doing accordion. And this group over here is doing, and this group over here is doing rippers. So now I would say probably the rippers probably don't have a reload period. Let's test it out a little bit, and then let's see what we can do, okay? It's all up to you.
Accordions, peppers. Let's start here.
One more. All right. So basically, what just happened? What was that about? We're using the simplest invisible stuff of our lives as teachers, and all of a sudden, like, what did you notice? What did you guys notice as what was happening over here? Throw something out. Anything. There's no right or wrong. What did you notice?
I think once there's a performance, you're more engaged.
You guys couldn't see this. You're like, oh my God, where am I? What else? What did you notice? What did anybody else notice?
Immediately became part of a larger context,
Right.
of a relationship.
Did anybody else feel that? All of a sudden, right, I'm so focused on myself, but then I feel the expanding circles, right, just kind of reaching out all across the room, right? From this, all right? And plus, I'm up here asking you and egging you on, but that's our jobs, right? That's our jobs as teachers, as educators, to egg everybody on, to get people excited a little bit. We don't need laser cutters to do that. I mean, it's wonderful if we have laser cutters, but we don't need the laser cutter. We just need some paper. And the other thing we need, I would say, is that we need a mindset shift. We need an attitude shift. We need to look a little sideways, a little bit at what we're doing. We need to hold things open a little bit more. We need to invite some serendipity, to be ready for that serendipity to appear, emerge in front of us. And in terms of materials, I would phrase it, maybe it's a working with instead of working on. So this paper, this material here, for most of us, most of the time, and this is an assumption, I don't think I'm too far off perhaps, but recognizing that this is an assumption, most of us, this paper is only valid as part of our practice when it's carrying text that came from some other place, when it's being worked on. And by shifting our relationship with this material to a working with, we potentially, and these things are never predetermined, so I'm equivocating a little bit here, but potentially we open up new relationships. We open up new ways of knowing with each other, knowing about our environment, about the expanding circles of empathy around who we are. And I would say I would put it to us as educators that this is what we're supposed to be doing, and that the maker education movement perhaps invites this possibility back into our schools. And I know a lot of you will remember with me where in the schools that we went to, we had kitchens, we had wood shops, we had radio shops, we didn't have 3D printers, but we were 3D everything. We were full minds in. And then over time, for a number of reasons, which we don't have to rehearse here, we've sort of sterilized. Well, now we have potentially an opportunity to bring some of this stuff back in. But I would again put it to us is it's not about the machine as much as it's about the relationship. So I don't mean this in an esoteric way at all. I think it's something that we all carry with us constantly. And I love this sense of a coffee cup. This is one of the most used pictures of a coffee cup in the entire universe. If you Google this coffee cup using Google Images, you will find thousands and thousands and thousands, like endless pages of this coffee cup in every possible use. I don't know why I say that, except to put it out to us that these materials are available to us in every nook and cranny of our lives. Whoa, that was weird. The word I want to bring into this is conversation. And materials are a conversational partner. That's the way I would put it. But I wouldn't say it in an esoteric way. It's not part of Dewey's learning theory at all. It's part of our daily lives when we're sitting with coffee and talking with a colleague about something that matters to us. Maybe we're sharing what happened in the first grade classroom where we're working, or maybe it's more about our families, or maybe about our careers. But what happens in a really good conversation is that when I say something, you respond. And when you say something, I respond. And I don't know what you're going to say, and you don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know how I'm going to respond to you at all. It's all sort of emerging as we're going. The conversation becomes a material between us, which, maybe through the materials of a cup of coffee, changes our relationship to each other. And sometimes, and I hope you've experienced this at some point or another, we hear ourselves say stuff that we didn't even know we knew. I just said, what? How did that? I don't know. I do know that. How do I know that? I didn't even know that I knew what I just said. And it's something about the call and response, back and forth serendipity of the conversation itself. Now, I hope you've experienced that in your lives, at some point in your lives. Maybe it's in the day-to-day grind of trying to do everything we have to do as professionals. It's rare. We keep talking about breathing and meditation and yoga and just having time to work out or run or read. All of these things might open up the availability to us to explore some of that serendipitous knowing, some of that place where innovation, I think, comes from at its deepest level. So I'd leave you with this as a basic idea, or something to maybe echo through our minds as we're doing these things today, all of these amazing activities that we have planned for today, and hopefully as something that kind of bring back to your school environments where you're at, is that what we're doing, I would say, or what I hope we're doing, is making space for wonder, bringing imagination into the relationships that we have with our students and with our other faculty. So we need knowledge that connects to what's real. Especially as adults, we don't have time for stuff we can't use. We're very, very busy. We're incredibly overworked. We have all these demands coming at us from all these different directions. We need tools, we need skills, we need ideas that we can connect to our jobs. Part of what connects to what's real is the imagination. Now, I think we probably know that. In our lives, there was a teacher, there was a book, there was a movie, there was a parent, an uncle, somebody in our lives that somehow found ways to make us quest after new knowledge, new ideas, new questions. And I think that's where we have an opportunity in our maker spaces, if we imagine the materials as part of this conversational unraveling, unfolding, ever-expanding ripples on a pond. So this activity, maybe a lot of you have seen this activity, the origami with LEDs or batteries or motors. And if you haven't, there's a lot of resources if you're not sure what it means. But basically, paper, fold it, put a light on it. It's incredibly fun. People enjoy it. And unfortunately, what I see sometimes in makerspaces is that that's where it ends. And I would say for all of us, our job is to not let it end. We have to continually be pushing ourselves to what comes next. For me, my hands-on equals minds in, and what I mean by that is that when we get a little boat and a little firefly, what stories is that? How do they connect to each other? One kid said it's sailing with fireflies across the Milky Way in this particular case, which for me has stuck with me for a very long time. Really a wonderful moment of imagination that came out of what could have been a cut and dried skill exercise. The paper part, the electronics part, the crafting part with LEDs or little pager motors. But it doesn't stay there. It continues to go and it continues to grow. And I would say that our jobs, and what I hope that we will continue to try to do, is to listen for that spark of inquiry, that spark of question, that spark of wonder as it emerges from the process of our hands being involved in materials, whatever the materials are, clay or paint or cardboard or paper or laser cutters or melted plastic on a 3D printer. As our hands get involved, our minds get involved. And as our minds get involved, we rely on creating wonderful stories, an imaginative give and take. And that's our job, to listen for that spark and then to nurture it and then to see where it goes after that. And we don't know where it's going to go. The materials itself will guide us through this process. But the more that we imagine a finite end or a finite conclusion or an end point goal, though we close ourselves off to the serendipity, to the wonder. And there are times for that. We have to get our jobs done. But I would say, and I would ask all of us to kind of think about or meditate on, and I would love to hear your responses, how you see this happening in your own life, is that by not closing it down, by making space for serendipity, we open up to real innovation, the kind of innovation that we hear scientists and engineers and innovators and poets and musicians and artists and playwrights, and that's what they're talking about. That's the kind of innovation that I think they're talking about, that open-ended serendipity that comes from the conversation with materials. So thank you very much. Again, to Ilani, I'm so honored and so thrilled to be here, and thank you for listening. And long live paper. That was great. Thanks to Kevin.